All right, hey Guelph, it's Mayor Cam Guthrie here, and I'm here with another special guest. Wonderful how the internet brings us together. This is Mike Moffatt. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. Really
Oh, thank
appreciate
you
it.
for having me.
Mike, why don't you tell everyone a quick story here about how you and I met?
That was a while ago. So
Yes.
I've been doing work on regional growth in southwestern Ontario, and you and I were at a meeting, and we've bumped into each other throughout the years. I recall a few years ago when I ran into you in Ottawa, and you were without a tie at a meeting. So
That's right.
we like to help each other out. So I'm
It was
delighted to be here.
It was very funny. I just so everyone knows, yes, I went to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities meeting. I think that's what it was at, or Yeah, I think it was the Federation of
I
Canadian
think it was FCM,
Municipalities.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm literally walking down a street, and you you were there, and I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I had originally tweeted out about, I don't know, the day before or that morning or something. Oh my goodness, I can't come all the way here, and I forgot a tie. And Mike literally undid his tie on the street, pulled it out, gave it to me, said, "Here you go, Cam. I think you need a tie today," and he was off. Mike, I still wear that tie. I
Well,
was
thank you. I
Just so you
appreciate
know,
that.
I
Yeah,
still have
that
that
was
tie and wear it.
yeah, it was just serendipity. I was actually leaving Chipotle of all places, and I happened to just be I had a tie because I was in a meeting that morning. My meeting was done. I didn't need to be formal anymore, so it couldn't have worked out better.
Well, I do really appreciate it. But beyond the, random running into each other experiences and stories, I have been fascinated, and just so everyone knows here, this conversation we're about to have is completely unscripted. We did not prepare in advance at all. But what I've been following online for the last several months, Mike, has been you diving deep into planning issues, the movement of people purchasing, selling homes all across the province. And the data that you've been slowly releasing over a long time now has been absolutely captivating. And I knew that you put together a little slide presentation a little while ago, and I was like, "Holy cow, that would be so great if you could share that with myself and Guelph and anybody else that wants to learn about this." And so, why don't you just quickly tell us, what do you do, Mike, and give us the little kind of title and what your research has been on from an academic point of view, and and then we can dive into your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple roles. So first of all, I'm an assistant professor at Ivy Business School at Western University in London, and I'm also the senior director of policy at the Smart Prosperity Institute, which is in Ottawa. So I normally commute a lot, though not so much these days. And what we look at the Smart Prosperity Institute is clean growth. We try and figure out how we can get better economic outcomes and better environmental outcomes at the same time. And although I'm not a housing person by trade, you really can't understand what's going on with the economy without understanding the choices that people make. You know, where they choose to live, where they choose to raise a family. So we've gotten into this area quite a bit over the last few months, just because of everything that's going on with home prices and the decisions that people are
Yeah.
making under COVID. We felt it was necessary. If we were really going to understand what was happening to the economy, we had to look at, what on earth is going on with the housing market, but also, what's going on with migration. Like, why are people choosing to live in one community rather
Yeah.
than another?
Yeah. And then that's so thank you. That's good kind
Mhm.
of heads up about you, your background, where you are, what you've been doing, what you've been researching. And then, as I said, you put a slide presentation together for another group. I forget which one it was, but I came in at the end. I missed I missed the slide presentation. But as I said, I've been following you on Twitter. And actually, why don't you hit everybody up with your Twitter handle right now?
So it's Mike P. Moffatt, two F's, two T's. So I don't know if you can see the Jersey back there, but it's spelled that way,
Okay. All right.
Moffa
That's easy. That's
TT.
perfect.
There we go.
Well, what I'll do is, other than following on Twitter, this is a deeper dive, and I'm going to be quiet. Let you, as I said, this is unscripted. I don't know what to expect here, but if you could walk us through and share your screen now, and walk us through the presentation, and then, if something pops up on the screen where I maybe have a question or whatever, just keep the screen up. Maybe I'll just pop in and ask a question as we move along.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm let's see here. So what I've been calling the series is Ontarians on the Move. Basically, the thesis of this is Ontario has changed in some very fundamental ways starting in 2015. And it's largely flown under the radar. We see the effects of it, but we don't so much see the causes of that. But we're a very different province than we were back in 2015, and this starts to dig into the whys of it. So the big picture, and I'm going to start pre-COVID because we were actually looking at these issues before COVID hit. I've been looking at this since about 2017 or so. Um, so the first thing that happened between 2015 and 2020 is all of a sudden Ontario's population grew much faster than the housing stock. So we had a population boom, but our housing stock didn't change all that much. We weren't building that many more houses than they were in the past. And then, secondly, young families looking for housing did what we call drive until they
Hmm.
qualify.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the
I
idea
heard that
behind
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we've all kind of seen this before. So one market gets expensive, so Toronto starts to get expensive. People move to Kitchener Waterloo, or they move to Guelph, and then those communities get expensive, and they go down the 401 or the 403. London gets expensive, so they move to St. Thomas. And house prices start to skyrocket in other markets because of this. They basically radiate, high home prices radiate out from the CN Tower. So Toronto gets expensive first, then Milton starts to get expensive, Hamilton, and so on. And it just kind of transmits. And it's this musical chairs effect. So what happens is, as Toronto gets expensive, families are moving to Kitchener Waterloo. That market gets expensive, and young families in Kitchener Waterloo say, I can't afford to, I'd really like to buy a house, but I just can't afford it here. They move to Brantford. Brantford gets expensive. Those families start to move to Tilsonburg and so on. So we see
Mm.
this kind of musical chairs, and the population starts to migrate further and further away from Toronto. And then finally, you have to talk about COVID just because it's the reality that we're living on in. And everything that we had sort of pre-COVID house prices has just accelerated this. That now, on top of all these sort of housing shortages and musical chairs effects, now you have a whole lot of money flowing into the housing market, and we'll talk about that in more detail.
Sure, sure.
So first, let's talk about the growing province. In any typical 5 year period, Ontario grows by about 600,000 to 700,000 people. And that had been pretty consistent going back to the 1980s. Well, between 2015 and 2020, we go July to July, that's just how the DACAN data works, we grew by over 1 million people. And this was largely unanticipated. If you go back to the Ontario Ministry of Finance, they do these population projections. They were projecting back in 2015 that we would grow by about 700,000, about the sort of normal amount.
Wow.
We didn't.
Huh.
We grew much, much faster than anyone had anticipated, and that caused problems. That caused problems because we hadn't planned for that, we hadn't anticipated that, and we hadn't changed all the other policies to accommodate that growth. So the question is, okay, well, where are these people coming from? Or first of all, where are they moving to? Who is seeing the population boom? And interestingly enough, if you look at this, or you have the city of Toronto here,
Yeah.
it's growing, but it's not actually one of the fastest growing places. We tend to think of the big cities growing faster, and traditionally that had been true. But if we see it, it's a lot of places north and west of Toronto. So Barrie, Guelph is growing quite a bit, Kitchener Waterloo.
Mm.
Other parts of Ontario as well, big growth in Ottawa, big growth in London, St. Thomas area. But overall, we're seeing population growth kind of spread throughout southern Ontario. And we're seeing population growth in a lot of places that traditionally hadn't seen much of it. So there's one place in the Niagara region I'm looking at called Thorold, Ontario. Traditionally hadn't been growing all that fast, and it's actually one of the fastest growing communities in Canada. So this is not a story of, okay, Toronto's getting bigger and the rest of the province is stagnant. In fact, it's just the opposite, that the places that are growing tend to be a lot of mid-sized and smaller communities. So why are we seeing this population growth? Well, it's not a baby boom. So natural population increase is basically what demographers say is the difference between births and deaths. And in fact, that's actually slowing down as the population ages. So it's not that we're seeing a baby boom, and it's not that we're seeing a big influx of people from other province, what we call interprovincial here. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of it. A lot of workers that had worked in the oil patch 10 years ago, some of them are migrating back from Alberta,
Okay.
but it's very small. We have seen increases in immigration, and this goes back to about 2014 that the Harper government had increased immigration targets, and the Trudeau government since then has done so a couple more times. So we've seen a significant increase in immigration. But
Well,
the big,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I
no, go
mean,
ahead.
it's just jumping off the graph here to
Yeah.
me is the non-permanent. I mean, that's I'm sure you're probably about
Yeah,
to
well,
talk
it's
about that,
massive,
but
yeah.
yeah.
So not a non-permanent increase is an increase in it's a few different categories. The two biggest are visa workers. So we think back to the changes the federal government made a few years ago to express entry, right?
Hmm.
The 2 week express entry to help out our tech sector and other sectors. And the big one, and I know you're seeing it in Guelph, is a boom in international students. University of
Yes.
Guelph,
Yep.
Western is seeing a big one. And although this is, we call this, or Statistics Canada calls this non-permanent, that's a bit misleading because often they stay. Like that's just sort of an
Yes.
immigration category, but they often say, and that's a wonderful thing. They're
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
most talented people in the world. A lot of 20 somethings come here as a student, or they get hired by one of our tech firms. They like it here, they stay, they raise a family, and so on. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
although
Yeah.
this is categorized as non-permanent, um, don't assume that okay, well this is literally non-permanent and eventually they'll leave. What often happens is the people in the non-permanent category a few years later get become Canadian citizens and kind of spill over into the immigration category.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is what we're seeing, and it's really changed the sort of age profile of the province. So two big things have happened in the last 5 years. The first thing is we all got 5 years older. So we kind of see the shift in the curve, and we see sort of the baby boomers aging. But the other thing that happened was this influx of international talent. So we see that cohort of people in their 20s and 30s, the difference between the blue line, which is 2015, and the red line, that's 2020. We
Yeah.
have this massive increase in 20 and 30 somethings. And if you know something about 20 or 30, that's the age that a lot of people buy their first home. Maybe they're living in
Yeah.
a one
Yeah.
or two bedroom apartment. They get married, they start thinking about having a family. They want some bigger real estate. So this is a big change. And again, it's flying under the radar. I would say it's on net, it's a fantastic thing. It's we always kind of worry about the population aging and how we're going to support an older population. Well, this is one way to do so, but we need to manage that growth,
Hmm.
and we haven't so far. There's been struggles so far in doing so, but this is a big change in 5 years that again has largely flown under the radar. We kind of sense it. We see little aspects of it here and there, but when it's displayed like this, you go, "Wow, okay,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
province is a lot
Yeah.
different than it was 5 years ago."
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
So again, the three big changes we've seen is a big increase in the number of seniors, which is important, which changes the housing market as well, because you have a lot of seniors who may want to downsize, go from a four-bedroom house to an apartment or condo, and a big increase in college age students, migration. One of the questions I always get about housing is, well, why are we seeing so many apartments and condos? Well, it's one and two, right? You're getting a lot of seniors
Yeah.
who want to downsize, and then you're getting a lot of 20 and 30 somethings. You're going to need one and two bedroom places for them. And then finally, those college age adults are starting to have families, are starting to think about having kids. In many cases, settling down and
Yeah,
having
setting
setting
up
roots.
their roots and yeah, yeah, their
Yeah,
roots in the communities
absolutely.
that they're at. Yeah.
So let's talk about this lack of homes and drive until you qualify. So the housing market didn't change all this much. So this is housing completions for the entire province. I could put up housing starts. It looks pretty similar. You see, this really hasn't changed too much. We've had a few more apartments and condos than we had built in the previous 5 years. Actually, fewer detached homes, but overall, not much changed in the amount of housing we built. In the previous 5 year period, we built just over 300,000 properties. The next 5 year period, it was about 330,000. So it was about 10% more.
So just let me jump in there. I can see the
Yeah.
bandwidth on each of those. As the correlation between the two seem to be similar. There's a similarity there. Uh, maybe your next slide, or maybe you're going to talk about this, but do you notice this? Is this even across the province, or are there major swings depending on the area of the province of the different housing types? But the overall is showing this what this graph is.
So there are, underneath there are some differences. So for instance, Tilsonburg is one of the fastest growing places. We're not seeing a lot of apartments getting built in Tilsonburg. It's
Sure.
more sort of the single detached. Whereas Toronto, we think about Toronto building all these condos. Well, that's in fact true.
Yep.
Toronto's had this sort of 1 and 2 bedroom condo boom. And so this is different across the province, and it in part explains why we see sort of migration across the province, because as those young families decide, okay, you know what, I want to raise a kid and I really don't want to do so in a 1 bedroom apartment, they realize that they can't afford a larger property in Toronto, and they're moving to communities like Guelph or like
Like
London.
Guelph. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so if we see here, and if we can compare this to sort of population growth, it kind of stands out. Population growth doubles, housing completion only goes up 10%.
Oh, look at that, eh? Wow.
So it's a
Yeah.
massive,
That's a telling
massive.
Graph. That's it tells a
Yeah, well, let's
story
put
right
it
there.
so
Yeah.
population, the difference in population growth is about 400,000 people, actually more closer to about 450,000. The difference in housing completion is about 10,000. So if you think of it that
Wow.
way, 450,000 more people, only 10,000 more home starts. I can't imagine a house with 45 people in it, if you sort of divide one by
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows it's like, okay, there's a disconnect here. And again, a lot of this is due to the fact that this was unanticipated. We can argue whether or not it should have been anticipated. But we just for whatever reason we're not able to keep housing completions up with population growth. And I'm going to look at the Toronto market now, because it's really this story really is sent. I hate. I'm a London guy. You're a Guelph guy. We hate to make everything Toronto centric, but we kind of have to here because it's
It's
really
where it
dry.
it's where it radiates out of, you
It's
know?
where it radiates
Yeah.
out of. So if we look
Yeah.
at immigration, about 70% of immigration in Ontario occurs in what we call like Metro Toronto. So that's Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, and so on. And about 45% of the non-permanent growth is Toronto. So what happens is those categories increase, but then if you look at the final one, the intra-provincial, that's people from moving from one part of the province to the other. Toronto on net in the first 5 year period lost about 100,000 people to the rest of the province. In the second
Yeah.
5 year period, it was
Look at
225,000
that.
people.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, so basically, you take a mid-sized southwest, city in southwestern Ontario, a London, a Guelph, a Windsor, or so on. That's the number of people on net that
Yeah,
had moved out of
that are
Toronto.
transporting themselves out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's basically like an entire southwestern Ontario city
that's
in
right.
5 years just leaving Toronto. And if we
Yeah.
look at who's leaving, some of it's, we often think, oh, okay, maybe it's retirees sort of cashing out of their properties and moving to Bobcaygeon or wherever. And we do see a bit of that. But the 10 most common ages to leave Toronto are 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, and 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in fact, the most common age on net to leave the city of Toronto is 0. It's kids under 12 months. That is who's leaving Toronto. It's
So
babies.
these families that, as you said, so they're living in a one or one bedroom or two bedroom, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're pregnant, and they want to start a family, and they immediately go, we can't stay here.
We
I
can't
want
stay
I,
here.
I want to be somewhere else where I have another room or amenities or a backyard or whatever, and they immediately so that's why it's reflected in those age groups, and that's the ones that are leaving.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, yeah, 0 is the most common age. The second most common age is 1. Yeah, we see this, right? That we see it's the young couple in their 30s, often with a kid and a second one on the way, and
Mm,
they're
yeah.
they're they're leaving the city. And it was funny, my personal interest in this topic. I'm interested in it as academic, but I also sold a home in London in 2017, and I can't tell you the number of people who looked at it, were people from Toronto and often pregnant,
Yeah.
and like, oh, that's interesting, and it certainly shows up in the data.
May I just ask, on that
Mhm.
last screen there,
Yeah.
was the between 2010 to 2015, um, the same sort of age group
Yeah, it was
as
in the second
2020?
one.
Yeah.
We're starting to see a few more retirees, and
Okay.
we don't have great COVID data. I suspect when we look at the COVID data, we will start to see even more retirees. But yeah, this trend has been going on, and it actually goes back earlier than that. Like if we look at the city of Toronto around 2005, it was kind of the same thing, right? So this
Okay.
isn't. It's not so much that this is new, but it's growing, right? It's just an issue that's getting larger and larger and larger as the population grows. So again, it had been traditional that the families, for 10, 15 years and now had been getting priced out of Toronto, but this has gone from, the size of this issue has grown. Now I'm going to show a graph here. This looks on the y-axis here, we have the home price growth,
Yep.
and the x-axis we have population growth. And we see here that Toronto's population growth wasn't really that, other than a little bit in 2018, 2019, wasn't really anything special, right? And the reason compared to the past, and the reason why it wasn't particularly anything special is because of this inflow outflow, right? That yes, the inflow to Toronto had increased, but so had the outflow. So the overall growth rates, in any given year
Yeah.
hadn't changed all that much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not going to be true for other cities. So if we look at where they go, here's kind of a map of where they go. So Toronto's right here.
Yep.
I'm not sure if my arrow's showing up.
Yep. It is
Uh,
showing. Yep. Yeah.
Perfect. So we got Toronto here at 0. If we look at where we're going, it's not that surprising. The biggest place that they're going to is Oshawa. Next biggest is sort of the Hamilton Burlington area. But
Yeah.
basically you can kind of make this circle of places that are 50, 100 kilometers away. Some other communities are gaining from it. Ottawa's gaining, London a little bit. But this is where those Toronto families are going, and they're, as we mentioned, they're also sort of causing price increases in those markets. Just, and this is data for a single year. We had on net 9,000 people move from Metro Toronto to Metro Oshawa, which was not
Yeah.
in a single year. So, and that's a lot of growth for a single city the size of Oshawa.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then we see this, what I mentioned, this sort of game of musical chairs. So if we look at Oshawa, so this is Oshawa here. So why is Oshawa growing? is not growing so much because immigration and non-permanent, though that's causing a little bit of it, particularly
Yep.
on the
Yep.
non-permanent side. Again, with the new university in Oshawa, but it's almost all driven by interprovincial, and like almost 100% of that interprovincial on net is from Metro Toronto. So over the last 5 years, 25,000 people on net have moved from Toronto to Oshawa, and that's net. So that considers people moving in the other direction,
Yes. Yep.
whichever way. But the interesting thing is, Oshawa is actually losing people to other communities. It's basically gaining people from a single community,
Yeah.
Toronto,
Yeah.
but then it's losing people to a bunch of other communities. So Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Belleville, Port Hope. And now this is a mix of some of this is retirees, particularly the Port Hope and Kawartha Lakes, but not all of it is. And actually, we see a lot of young families moving from Oshawa to Peterborough and Belleville
Hmm.
because of the same thing. Oshawa's getting to, you're young couple in Oshawa, you're 28 years old, you want to start a family and go, wow, Oshawa got really expensive over the last 3 to 4 years. I can't afford to live here. So they're moving to Peterborough and Belleville.
Okay. Yeah.
Peterborough's
Yeah.
getting expensive. They're moving to Kingston. So it's this
Yeah.
kind of game of musical chairs that keeps happening across the province. So if we look at Guelph, we see particularly in 2016 and 17, these sort of huge population growth
Yeah.
and huge house price growth. 2018 and 19 were still sort of well above average population growth, but now this starts to look a little bit different than Toronto, where these years between 2015 and 2020 start to stand out as being unusual years, both in the sense of population growth and in the sense of home price growth. We had a little bit
That's
of
right.
a bubble in 2017, as you can see here. And I'm sure
Yeah.
many people watching this will remember that well. The bidding wars of 2017.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to again sell a home in London during that. And again, back then I thought I made out like a bandit. Now compared to what prices are, I'm not feeling
In
that way
in
anymore.
fact, in 2017, I remember I was interviewed by Bloomberg TV. I
Mhm.
drove to Toronto to their studio there to talk about the housing prices in Guelph. And that was the first time ever that I learned of the phrase drive till you qualify. And that was again, Toronto GTA area saying, okay, I can't afford this. They drive a little bit. Milton, Mississauga, oh, it's still expensive. They drive a little bit further. Oh, Guelph, now all of a sudden I can qualify for that house. So that's interesting that that completely reflects to that year as shown on this graph.
Yeah, it was a very unusual year, and it shows up. I have a lot of data for a lot of cities in Ontario, and 2017 and all of them was a banner year for home price growth. Here's one that where it stands out: Brantford, 2000.
Wow.
Brantford had
Yeah,
been a city that hadn't been growing all that much.
that's
Half a
right.
percent a year, like clockwork. Home prices had been consistently growing by about 5%, other than the recession. And then, boom, you have 4 years in a row where population is growing by over a percent. And other than 2018, which was a bit of a correction from the banner years of 16, 17, home prices are growing 10, 15%.
Yeah.
So this kind of shows the relationship.
Yeah.
And then if you want to see an extreme relationship, go to London.
Oh dear. Is there something wrong with your chart there?
Yeah, it's
My
yeah,
goodness.
it's like yeah,
Wow. The
it's
trajectory there is constant.
yeah, exactly. It's basic. Yeah, it's we don't in the social sciences like economics, we don't usually see these relationships that are this tight. Again, London had been a place consistently home prices were growing 3 to 4% a year like clockwork. City had been growing by about 0.5% a year, and then starting in 2016, boom, everything just explodes. And you know even we didn't see the correction as much in 2018 in home prices. Things kept growing. So there was a reason again that why that 2015 year is so important that if we look at population growth data or home price data, there's a real change all of a
Yeah.
sudden, and we
Yeah.
can put that back to a couple of things. Some of that's policy, again, changes in immigration policy and things like that. A lot of that is international students. Canada became more competitive on the international student markets after the election of President Trump and the difficulties that
Hmm.
international students had getting
Interesting.
visas over
Yeah.
there. So not all of this was decisions
Hmm.
that necessarily the provincial or federal government made. Some of this was sort of international
Just
changes that kind of
a ripple effect of outside influences. Yeah.
outside forces. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is what we see here, and this is, again, what drove so much of the housing market pre-COVID was this sort of population growth. So again, housing prices are transmitted across southern Ontario, and we see this that the further away you get from Toronto, the later population growth happens, and the later home prices go up. So they go
Okay.
up a little bit later in Tillsonburg than they do in Guelph. London is a little late to the party. St. Thomas even more so, and so on. We see increased commuting time and distances that oftentimes people, like the people who are priced out of Kitchener and moving to Tilsonburg, are often still working in Kitchener, and they might be a nurse, a teacher, so on. Some work a job where you have to, at least in the pre-COVID days, actually physically be there. So commuting's up. We see more traffic on our major highways. And one sort of, I've been talking about the challenges, but there's been a lot of positives out of this. And one of the big positives is we're seeing growth where little growth had occurred before. We'd seen a lot of small towns, kind of again, between Toronto and London, that had been in decline.
Hmm.
Little towns of 4 or 5 thousand people. The population was aging. Main Street was having difficulty. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, they get this influx of 20 something families, and it's really revitalized a lot of communities that were struggling. So, we have to sort of manage these challenges, but there's so many benefits to this. Again, having a lot of great talent coming in, revitalizing some of our smaller communities, these shops reopening on Main Street. So, there's a lot to like here. Again, we just need to manage this growth. So let's talk about COVID. Um, During COVID, like I'm a sports card guy, so I kind of follow what's going on in hockey and baseball cards, and we're seeing all kinds of asset classes go up in value. I know you're a musician. We're seeing this in like vintage guitars and things
Yes.
like
Yeah.
that. All of these a variety of asset. We're seeing GameStop shares, the stock markets, Bitcoin, or so on. Across the board, we're seeing a whole bunch of asset classes absolutely boom in value. So we're seeing record prices for vintage hockey cards. Well, what's
Just before
happened?
you continue, I have to tell you my Wayne Gretzky rookie card story.
You got a wing. Oh, I'm jealous. My story
No,
is.
no, this is
Uh
going to be
oh,
bad.
uh
This
oh.
is not good. Very quickly, grade six, grade six, our class, the school board, whatever, bought a Commodore 64, and we didn't have enough money for a computer desk. And so the grade six class decided to do a garage sale in the gym to raise money to buy a computer desk. And I brought my Star Wars and my hockey cards and wanted to be, yeah, I can already see you not liking
Yeah.
the story. I, no word of a lie, I remember a guy coming up to me and flipping through all those blue O-Pee-Chee cards, and he took the Wayne Gretzky one out, and he also grabbed the Millennium Falcon, and he offered me $2,
Goodness.
and I took it
Oh no.
to help the grade six class get their stupid computer desk
Death for their
for a
Commodore
Commodore
64.
64. So, okay, back to housing.
Okay, so I don't feel so bad then. I've got a near complete 7980 O-Pee-Chee set, but yeah, I happen to be missing card number 18, which
Okay,
is the Wayne Gretzky card.
that's
But
right.
what's essentially happened is that white collar professionals' savings have gone way up. You've got, the sort of top by income about 20% of the population. They're not going on vacation. They're not buying new cars.
Yeah,
They've got a lot of. They're not commuting. They're saving a bunch of money,
yeah,
and they're pouring this money into a lot of different asset classes, from Millennium Falcons
yes,
to Wayne Gretzky hockey cards, and a lot of it is into housing. We're seeing this big rise in purchases of second homes, particularly on people who might live in a Toronto and go, well, I don't really need to be in downtown Toronto right now because not much is going on. Why don't I go buy a house in Bob Cajun or wherever?
hmm,
So, as somewhere to live, but also an investment property. So we're seeing all these asset classes go up. And then when we talk about, houses, it's also really cheap to get a mortgage because of the global interest rate collapse. And again, the sort of desire for more space as work from home has skyrocketed. So we're seeing this massive increase in demand for residential real estate. It's uneven, but it's occurring not just in Canada, but the United States, Western Europe, or so on. So the next one, this is kind of hard to read, but if we look at the percentage difference in home prices, the composite index that the realtors put out, Guelph is up 30% year
yeah,
over year.
yeah,
London's up 37%. Even like a slow, struggling market like Calgary is up 6%.
yeah,
So we've seen this massive increase, which again is essentially just too much money chasing too few homes. So
yeah,
it's a bit of a and I think this division is important. That basically what was driving the housing market in Southern Ontario up into the pandemic is different than what's driving it today. Today it's just again, people buying these second homes and an investment property rather than a population growth story. So we go, okay, well, what happens after COVID, right? That's I think the question people ask, particularly anyone buying a home, is like, okay, Mike, are we going to see a home price collapse? And because I'm a good economist, I go, well, it depends. I have to give this sort of two-handed answer, and it's going to depend on a few things. So I have this sort of list of six things. The big thing that I think is an underrated thing that we have to look at is whether or not the international students and the people with the work visas come back at the same rate. Now that
sure,
uh,
yeah,
now that we have the ability to do this online, we might have students who could still go to Guelph or go to Western,
yeah, yeah. Do
um,
it online. Don't
do it
have to come
online.
here.
They
Yeah,
don't have to
yeah,
come here. So that could affect our population growth. And since that's been affecting our housing market, and as well, the changes that we're seeing from the Biden administration to loosen up their rules, it may be more difficult for our universities and colleges to attract these
to
students.
attract. Yeah, yeah,
Tourism, and we know, tourism, people coming to Canada, Airbnb, certainly affects the housing market in a different way. What happens to global interest rates is obviously important, people's ability to affect mortgages. Work from home. If work from home continues after the pandemic, that actually might make markets like Guelph and London again more attractive, where you have these people going, well, why am I paying all of this money to live in Toronto if I don't have to go to my Bay Street
yeah,
job every day? If I can do my Bay Street job from my living room.
yeah,
What happens to savings and spending rates of white collar professionals? They start to ratchet that back. And shop from home as well, I think, is a little bit underrated as a factor because we very well may see if retail doesn't bounce back, that's going to create some real opportunities to turn some of those retail properties into housing property. And we've already kind of seen
yeah. Agreed. Yeah,
in some communities, it's kind
yeah.
of think like, okay, do we need this many malls? They're struggling. Could we? Yeah,
Just on that, what
yeah,
I'm noticing is even just a few years ago, even pre-COVID, there was already starting to have this. swell of support of, wow, these parking lots,
Yeah,
not the actual buildings, the
yeah,
parking lots, they are so
yeah,
underutilized and they're just sitting there. Maybe they're almost full at Christmas, but that's it. And so, 3 or 4 years ago, it was all about the parking lots could be turned into high residential because they're already in built up areas near transit, all that kind of stuff. But now that conversation has very much solidified on the parking lot issue, and now it's shifting to the buildings themselves.
yeah.
And so, sorry to jump in there with a system.
Yeah, no, that's yeah.
Yeah,
Let's make this a discussion.
yeah,
But yeah, we are absolutely seeing discussion like that. So and that may help us with some of these tight real estate markets if we can
mm,
if we can turn some of those properties into housing in our cities. So, and one final thing that we should discuss. So we're kind of looking at the post COVID thing. We're seeing in the long term outlook, there's a group with this called Century Initiative that they want to have 100 million people in Canada by 2100, so 79 years from now, which is, certainly possible. But they're projecting, what that would mean for Ontario, that the greater, so the GTHA, which is close to about 9 million people right now, by 2100 would be 33.5 million people. Basically,
may I jump in?
yeah.
Who's the organization or level of government or
Yeah,
that's
so it's
who is Century Initiative? Who's
yeah,
initiative?
so I should have
That's
mentioned so
not
essentially
policy. That's not
it's
policy.
yeah, no, it's a consortium of people. It's like the Conference Board of Canada and a bunch
Oh
of
wow.
sort of
Okay. Yeah.
organizations like
Yep.
that. Um and there was a piece in the Globe and Mail, I think about 2 weeks ago, where former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was sort of touting this initiative. So they've got some
Okay.
former politicians, including Brian Mulroney, on board, who say
Okay.
that this might be the future. That there
Huh.
might be 100 million people by
So
2100.
it's blue skying a
It's
little bit,
it's
it's underpinned by some real data and factors and for things to consider.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
certainly it's an aggressive target, and again, it's not a government target. It's a sort
Sure.
of
Sure.
group
Yeah.
of group of people outside target saying, okay,
Yeah.
this is certainly possible. So
Although
it's
I
it.
would say most citizens, when they hear places to grow, they make it feel like it is going to be 33.5 million people.
Well, that's it. But I think we haven't sort of wrapped our heads around what that might mean.
Yeah,
33
look
and a
at
half
the
million people
numbers.
is the population of Canada going back, 10 years ago or so.
Right in there. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
in about a 100 kilometer radius of the CN Tower. So if this or even something even remotely approximating this is going to happen over the next 80 years, we have some real challenges ahead, and we have some really difficult decisions and conversations that need to be had,
Mhm.
because I think the worst possible thing we could do is get something like this but not plan for it, right?
That's
So
right.
we have
Yeah.
to sort of figure out, okay, who do we want to be as a country, as a province, as a region, and how do we get there, and be proactive about it, rather than what's happened over the last few years where we've had to really sort of scramble and go, oh my goodness, okay, we've got all these international students, we've got all these visa workers that we went to such great lengths to attract. How can we manage that growth, and how we create an economy that works for everyone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will end it there.
Oh, great. There's your info there for
There's my
everybody.
info, so you can
Yep.
always email me, and I've got a series at medium.com where I go into this data in even more excruciating detail.
And if
So,
someone's listening has a Wayne Gretzky rookie card they want to get rid of, there's your contact
absolutely,
info.
absolutely. Number,
Well, maybe
yes.
I'll thank you. Maybe I'll ask you just to bring your screen down there, and then you and I can kind of see each other here just to end things off. And first of all, Mike, thank you so much. As I said at the top, this is completely unscripted, so it was lots of aha, wow moments for me through looking at those slides, and I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. So thank you very much. I'm sure there's lots of people watching this that are gonna feel the same way as me. I wanted to hit you up with some questions. I have nothing written down here, just off the top of my head as we go. And actually, I think we'll probably just maybe two or three questions,
Mhm.
kind of rapid fire, and we'll end it there. The first one I have for you is, I guess it's a kind of a Guelph question that I'm thinking about from a planning perspective, and that is all day two-way go.
Yes.
And the innovation corridor between Toronto into Guelph, into Kitchener, into Waterloo, back and forth.
Mhm.
And you've had multiple levels of government. Well,
Yeah.
obviously mostly the provincial, and different. The Liberals got the Conservatives now. And they're all very supportive of that, which is great. And the region is very supportive of that innovation corridor. What crystal ball moment here?
Mhm.
What do you think in regards to this exodus of people for the factors that you've described in your presentation? And how is that going to be either, I think, amplified
Yeah.
when all day two-way go comes into play here in
Mhm.
2025, 2026? We're going to have, I think, an even bigger mass amount of people saying, "Oh, I'm gonna go to
Yeah.
Guelph. I'm gonna go to Kitchener. I'm gonna go to Waterloo." That's my thought. What do you say?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we see this in the housing market data that the Niagara region, when they got to go, we started to see both population growth and housing booms there. So absolutely, and I think it's needed. It's absolutely
Yeah,
needed. The more we can do this transition, because people, we're seeing that people, again, just because they're moving to a Guelph or doesn't necessarily mean that they're working there. And a lot of times, we're most of us, or many of us these days, are in dual income households, and we don't necessarily work in the same city as our spouse, right? So
sure,
we need
sure.
we need to
Yeah,
have that connectivity. But yeah, absolutely, I think we're only going to see those growth in those communities as we get better transit, because that's, yes, people, do a drive till they qualify, but there's a lot of places where they could qualify. So you get into these other
yeah.
decisions of, okay,
That's a fair comment.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
where, how can I actually get to work, those kinds of things, and
yeah.
transit is certainly important in that.
And I guess from now a housing stock type of
Mhm.
question, and I'm going to
Mhm.
play sort of both
Yeah,
sides of the ledger on this one.
yeah,
So the one side of the ledger is the family dream is to have the detached home
yeah.
with the backyard
Mhm.
and grass to
Yeah,
cut and throw the ball around.
yeah,
And so that's sort of a drive or a dream of many. But then the communities are not really. I'll speak for mine, and
mhm,
by the way, I'm not judging here or anything. I'm just
mhm,
saying, between 2000 2005, probably we were doing tons of detached homes. And
mhm.
now, because of the Province's Places to Grow Act,
Yeah,
you have to fit so many people within the boundaries the cities are at. Now you're seeing these townhouses, row houses,
mhm.
6-story, 10-story, 18-story, high-rise types of buildings to meet that population growth. Where I guess I'm coming down on the two sides of the ledger here is
Yeah,
more an environmental question.
yeah.
From an environmental perspective is, and a financial, to be
Mhm.
honest with
Yep.
you, and a financial. From a city perspective, when we sprawl, when we go out, that infrastructure costs money.
Yeah.
It's not fully covered by developers, and it can cost more in servicing in the long run versus high-rise apartment buildings, stuff like that can be easier to
Yeah.
do in some cases, not in all,
Yeah.
in some. So where are you seeing sort of this demand for housing types versus what's available from the supply side, and how that can hit
Yeah.
people both environmentally and financially
Yeah, no,
from a
absolutely.
city perspective.
Yeah, well, there's certainly, there's continued demand. I mean, for the even the non-detached, like we're not seeing cases where properties are getting, infill properties are getting built and nobody's buying them. I mean, they're
Yeah,
sort of
exactly
flying
right.
off
Yeah,
the shelf. But
yeah,
yeah, I don't. I mean, this is, I think, where we have to have these sort of difficult conversations because ultimately something is going to have to give, and there's trade-offs involved. And I can't, as an economist, I can tell you what those trade-offs are, but I can't, well, I can tell you what the value, but I don't necessarily have any sort of expertise on this, or any more than anyone else. But we're going to either have to either, if the population keeps growing, I mean, either we're going to have to get more aggressive on infill than we are now, or we're going to have those issues of sprawl, of loss of farmland, environmental use, and then all the sort of financial infrastructure that goes
Sure.
beyond that. Or we might just decide, okay, well, let's just slow down population growth, and then we're dealing with issues around competitiveness and an aging population. So
Sure. Yeah.
we have to pick a lane, and I don't I don't envy the it's easy for me as an economist just to say, okay, we'll just do infill, but I
Yep.
also understand, I also live in a neighborhood, and have my neighbors aren't always so happy when construction goes on around us. So
Yeah.
it's building that sort of political constituency, because there's going to be opposition to any of those. Again,
Yes.
I'm an
There is. Yeah. Yeah.
environmentalist, so to me, and it's funny because I spend a lot of time talking to home builders and other groups that you wouldn't think an environmental economist would be talking to you all that much. And my position has been like, well, look, I'm a fan of the green belt. I want to keep the green belt as an environmentalist. I think this is important, but we're not, the environmental movement. We're not going to have the political and social capital to keep that if people can't afford a home and people have nowhere to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah. And there's the rub.
We're not going to, 10 years from now, home prices are 2-3 million and nobody can afford a home. People are going to go, hey, what about that land? What about that wetland over there? That I think we could
Yeah.
drain that, and
Yeah.
that could make some nice housing. So
Yeah.
my thing, my position's always been, okay, this growth is happening. Let's not stick our head in the sand. Instead, let's work together. And you have, again, these kind of strange bedfellows where a guy like me, who's always kind of thinking through how to get better environmental outcomes, is working with developers and home builders to try and sort of figure out how to best manage this growth.
Wow. Well said. Very well said. Mike, thank you so much. We'll end it there. I mean, I could go on and on with you. I want to respect your time and everyone else's time that's joined us. And this is so great. Thank you for putting in your slides some context around Guelph too. I really appreciate you doing that. And I just thank you for taking the time. One more time though, what's your Twitter for your social media, just so everyone knows?
It's Mike P. Moffatt, just all, no punctuation or anything. So Mike P. Moffatt, two F's and two T's in Moffatt.
Great. And thank you. I really do appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll connect another time. And if we accidentally run into each other wherever, I'll try to have a new tie for you to give back to you as a present. Okay.
I look forward to the days where we can run into each other in the street again.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right. Take care. Thank you very much. See
Thank
you
you.
later. Yeah.